How do you manage long-running background tasks in .NET Core? Let's have a look at one approach. I have a simple web application here that when I send a POST request to the API endpoint, it will try to process that in the background. Now, the problem is this is a long-running task that might take some time. And I don't want to keep the client waiting. So how do you handle that? One approach could be to use a background service. So let's go ahead and add that. Add a new class to our project. I'm just going to call it BackgroundService CS. And then inside of there, we're going to implement the iBackgroundServe interface. This interface has two methods that you need to implement. One is start async, and the other one is stop async. And these are both fired off by the hosting infrastructure. Now, when I say hosting infrastructure, if you're running this on a web app, that's actually an implementation detail. You don't really need to know how that works. But what you do need to know is that when your application starts up, the hosting infrastructure will call the start async method on all of the services that implement IBAC. And when the application shuts down or stops, it will call the stop async method. So that's what we're doing here. We're just calling the hosting environment start, which is the only thing that needs to be implemented here. Then we can start our task. So I'm going to start a task here that just simulates a long-running process. So we're going to use task run and just sleep for 10 seconds. And after 10 seconds, we'll write out a message to the console. Then the next step is to actually register this service with the runtime. And we can do that by going into our startup CAUs file, and in the configure_services method, we're going to tell it to add a new service for the type back. Then we also need to make sure that we install the Microsoft extensions, hosting, abstractions, package. That's the one that contains the iBackgroundServe interface. And we already have that in our project, but if you don't, you can go ahead and add it. Now, this is a great start, but we don't want to keep the service running while the application is being shut down. So we're going to add another service here called this. And now in our BackgroundService class, we're going to implement the stoppable interface. And that interface has a single method called and this method is what gets called when the application is shutting down. So we can cancel the task by setting this cancellation token, and that way the task will stop. Okay, so now if I run this application and I send a post request, it will start the task, but it won't keep the thread running while the application is shutting down. One thing to note here is that you should not use this method to do things like database transactions. You should only use this to do things like queuing messages to RabbitMQ or starting a timer or something like that, where you can just pass in a cancellation token to stop that process. All right. So hopefully that helps you understand one approach for handling long-running background tasks in .NET Core. If you like this content, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.